I want to take a minute and talk about what we mean when we say that addiction is a disease. First of all, when you think about addiction, you've got to think about our relationship with mood altering substances. And every one of us has a relationship with mood altering substances. In fact, they fall into four general categories. The first relationship is abstinence. Some people say, I stay away from alcohol and other drugs. I don't use things that change my mood. And even within that, there are some different levels. Some people will say, I'm really extreme and I don't use any kind of drug, even caffeine. Whereas other people will say, oh, I'll have a Diet Coke, but I won't drink alcohol or use other drugs. That's abstinence. And it has its own layers in it. But the next general category is where we find most American adults. Most American adults, the relationship that they have with mood altering substances, we call substance use. It means that I don't have a prohibition against using mood altering substances. I might have wine with my dinner. I might not have a problem with using a mood altering drug that a doctor prescribes me. But my use of mood altering substances doesn't cause problems in my life. That's where most Americans fall into. The next level historically, we called it abuse. Now, this whole model of these four different levels is an older model, but it's one that still makes a lot of practical sense. And abuse or misuse just means this, that my use of mood-altering substances has started to cause problems in my life. Maybe it's causing conflict with my spouse or my family. Maybe it's causing me to miss work or be late to school. Maybe it's causing more serious things like a DUI. But I still have, when I start having these problems, people who are just in this abuse or this, what we would call today, an early or mild substance use disorder, when they have problems associated with their use, they stop or they change their use so that it doesn't cause problems anymore. There's a third category. Clinicians today will call it a severe substance use disorder, but historically we've used this word addiction, and that's still a word that's in use today. And it's a great differentiator because a person who develops addiction is in a different circumstance from the person in those other three categories, because the person in those other three categories, they can make changes. They can volitionally or by their own will change. So if someone is abstinent, they can say, I decide I'm going to use a little bit. If someone has problems, they can say, I'm going to change my use or stop my use. Addiction is a condition where a person's ability to choose is so severely impaired because of a condition in their brain. Changes in their brain actually hijack a person's ability to choose, to make choices about their use. And so people will continue to use an addiction despite having terrible consequences. Thinking about this condition, what is it? What is addiction? Well, addiction, by definition, and there's a few words that are really important, we'll break it down, but the definition of addiction is that it is a primary, chronic, neurobiological disease, and that it has genetic, psychosocial, and environmental factors that influence its manifestation, and that it's what it looks like. Those are the things that are the cause. What it looks like is impaired control over use, compulsive use, continued use despite harm, and physiological cravings. So let's break those down. So chronic disease. What that means is that this is something that, and it's described as chronic primary disease. A lot of times people think that addiction is just caused by problems in your life, and if you fix the problems in your life, then the addiction will go away. And that's actually not true. Addiction is so severe that even if you fix the problems in your life, people will still have it if they're not treated for it. So addiction is a primary disease, and it's a chronic disease, meaning it gets worse and worse if there is not healthcare intervention if it's not intervened upon. And it eventually, for many, unfortunately, is terminal if not treated. We talk about impaired control over use is one of the key elements. And what does that mean? It means that someone actually will say, I promise that I'm only going to have 2 drinks tonight. I promise that I'm only going to use this much tonight. And they are not lying. They mean it. But once they put the drug, the alcohol or other drug in their body, impaired control means that they cannot predict what is going to happen. And so people will promise, I'll put it in my body and I'll stop at this, but they will not be able to control their use. Compulsivity is this, or compulsive use is a characterization that's often sometimes referred to as this mental obsession. Someone might say, I can't have a problem with alcohol really because I work 9 to 5 and, yes, as soon as I get off work, I'm drinking all through the night and it's causing all sorts of problems in my life. But from 9 to 5, I can go without drinking. Compulsivity is what are your thoughts from 9 to 5? And a person with addiction, their thoughts are going to be constantly focused on whether they are the top of their thoughts or not, constantly focused on being able to drink at 5:01. It's an obsession where all the things that matter in your life become less and less important, and the drug becomes the most important thing. And so that compulsivity results in continued use despite harm. So again, a person in that abuse or misuse, or now what we would call a mild substance use disorder, who's just beginning to have problems in their life because of their substance use, they're going to stop. They're going to change. They're going to say it hurts more to have these problems than to have the drink or the drug. But a person with addiction and that change in the brain will continue to use despite harm. And unfortunately, that's harm to self and often to others as well. And then cravings. Cravings are simply physiological symptoms where people they feel a need for the drug. So thinking about what addiction is and what it looks like, why do we talk about it as a neurobiological condition? The brain is the organ that is impacted mostly by addiction. And a story that helps me understand that is when I think of my father. So my father was a fighter pilot, he's an engineer, a scientist. He's the most moral human being I've ever met. So he's got brains and education. He's tough. If you've ever met a fighter pilot, they're smart and resourceful and strong. And he's also a very moral guy. He happens to also be a very religious man. So he's got all these things going for him. He told me a story once that when he had to go through a very specific type of military survival training, there was a time where they take them and they basically keep them from any liquids for an ungodly amount of hours. It's more than a couple of days, to where they bring them to a point where they're basically dying of thirst. And he said, I discovered about myself in that moment that in that moment, I would have done anything to anyone to get water. I would have lied. I would have cheated. I would have stolen. I would have hurt you because the instinct, the need, the survival need was so desperate that I would have done things that I would otherwise never have done. Well, guess what? The way our brains work when we are in life and death situations, when we are in a starvation type situation, all of us are highly likely to do things that we would otherwise not do. Why is that? It's not because my father was immoral or stupid or weak or broken or sick. It is because the brain, when it goes into a survival state, changes, and the parts of your brain in the prefrontal and frontal area that are really responsible for your impulse control, what I call the moral centers, those places where I might have an impulse to do something, but I stop myself from doing it. If I think about a car, the midbrain is like the engine. It's where your instincts are. It's where your fight or flight and survival mechanisms are. And the frontal part of your brain, well, it's like the controls, the steering wheel and the brakes and you need both. You need that engine and that raw power, and you need the controls. But imagine if you had a powerful car and it's just going down the highway with no controls. This is what happens with addiction. The instincts, survival instincts take over, and the brain tells the person, you must have this drug or you will die. And so just like a person who is starving to death and their brain says, you must have this food or you will die, and they will then do anything to get food or water, addiction causes that same thing to happen in the brain. And this is so critical to understand, because that's not what it feels like when you're the loved one, when your child is doing things that are dangerous and harmful to themselves, when your spouse isn't coming home, and when people who you love, you can see them just being destructive, and often you're hurting. The first thought in people's minds is not, my loved one is suffering from a disease. And often people who are suffering from this, they don't know it either. The thought is, I'm a bad person. The thought is, my spouse of 30 years just doesn't love me anymore. My dad doesn't love me. If I could have been a better kid or a better spouse. But the truth is that all of the shame and self-blame that happens, it comes from the fact that we don't understand that what we're dealing with addiction is a disease that has changed the brain. And the most beautiful news, the most exciting news is, with help, people get better. For decades, I have been working with people who have this terrible disease, and what they believe of themselves is, I'm no good. Of course I'm no good. I didn't take care of my kids, or I failed school, or I didn't, I neglected my parents, or whatever. And family members and people who love them feel like that, I was rejected, or I was left or lost. And when the miracle of coming into a place where they can get treatment and find healing happens, people realize, I still have my loved one. I still have the human being that I want to be. The news that healing from addiction happens is the best thing I can tell anyone today. So understand that addiction is not about moral failing. It is not about being stupid or broken or weak. Addiction is a disease that changes and takes over the brain. And the person with addiction is not who they are. What you're encountering is the disease. The good news is that with help, that person can come back and come back better than ever. Addiction is a disease, and with treatment, there is a way out.